Hello, everybody.
Hello.
It is Saturday night at 10 o'clock Eastern, 9 o'clock Central, where I'm currently at. I'm Chris Weave. This is LYSSA BECK, and this is Starfleet Tactical. Thank you very much for, once again, for those of you who are repeat customers, spending your Saturday night with me and LYSSA. It is the two of us tonight. I'm going to be doing a little talk, as the title says, about battle group versus battle line, but you may notice that I am in a different location than I usually am. And that is because I am conducting an experiment. I am broadcasting from my dad's place in Des Moines, Iowa. Usually when I'm in Des Moines, I go over to my brother's place. My brother upgraded my dad's Wi-Fi, Ethernet. Sorry, it's been a long day.
Just say internet.
What?
Just say internet.
Internet. That's the word I was looking for. Internet. He upgraded the internet here, and it supposedly meets the specs. And I did a test earlier yesterday when I recorded about a half hour worth of material just while I was talking and reading and stuff. And I had a bunch of other windows open, and it seemed to perform fine. So we will see how this works out. If we have problems of some sort, because it is a wireless connection. If we have problems, I'll just redo this presentation at some other time. So it'll be good, even if there's some issue. But
and if he disconnects, I will extol you guys with Tales of D&D.
Yes, and she will show you the cat, which
yes,
me, you'd rather be looking at the cat than looking at me. The cat is the cat is pretty. The cat's looking pretty good. So in any event, but tonight, instead of going over to my brother's house, I'm doing this from my dad's place. So, LYSSA, how was your week?
It's been good. I thought I was supposed to have one of my D&D sessions on Tuesday. I did not. It's this coming Tuesday. I thought the players were asking for this Tuesday, and so I panicked. Charged into planning. So that was fun because I had session the next day too, and I was like, I could have planned for that instead.
Well, at least you're ahead.
Yeah. My players are gonna have a fun time. They're pretty sure no one's in the chat right now. I can safely say this. They are going to essentially. They're babysitting a half-bay child. And so when they put her to sleep, they're going to essentially be fighting a nightmare. And so, I am purposefully trying to kill the players. But it's not going to actually kill the players. Whenever they go on death saves, I'm going to message them, you wake up.
This is interesting, and this is worth a little sidebar real quick before I start the presentation. COVID has forced us all to do stuff that we wouldn't do normally. Like, for instance, I find myself hosting a show on the internet on Saturday nights, which is entirely came about because of COVID, and I had nothing better to do. And Alec asked me one day if I'd like to be on his show, and I was. And next thing I know, I was hosting a show with Pat Doyle. But it also it forced me to learn how to do Discord and stuff like that. And there is a lot of things you can do with Discord and distributed play that you can't do if everybody's in the same room. There's a lot of things that you can do. You can, because you can have, if the DM is passing notes back and forth, everybody else knows something's up. But in Discord, you can create a secret channel that if you don't have the blessed mark upon you, you don't even know the channel is there.
Yep.
So Discord is just a fascinating tool. I think there's a few things. I mean, I think Discord works best with small groups, not large groups. It works best with sort of targeted things. It's a little problematic if there's lots of places where I go why don't you just use a mailing list? Why is Discord easier than just using a mailing list for that? But for just sort of trivial, I've got a channel open all the time. I mean, I think it's way better than, for most of the instances when people use Zoom, I think Discord is probably better.
Oh yeah. No, like don't get me wrong. Like it also depends on if you like have Nitro or whatever, because like if a server's boosted, like you get more power to like video and everything like that. Plus, like if you're a Nitro user, like you get extra stuff too. So
you gotta you know, paying a little bit of money is worth it. You always get more if you pay a little bit. Right?
Yeah,
you always get more if you pay a little bit. So like I've got Nitro on my Discord server,
right.
And I use it for a bunch of stuff. So it's a useful tool. But then again, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world, and I'm all the bits and pieces that I'm involved with. I don't have nearly enough time to play with that stuff like I would really like to. So
yeah. No, I use it on a daily basis, like literally a daily basis, just for work.
Yeah. I don't use it for work. We use Microsoft Teams at work, which in some ways is better, and other ways is it goes from being a lot better to a lot worse, depending upon what particular thing you're talking about.
Yeah, it's entirely up to what you're trying to do with it. Like, it's good for communities.
Yeah, it's good if you want. If it's good if you want to maintain a record. It's good if you want to be able to do a bunch of different things, like make direct calls to people. Not have things that are available for everybody to see. It's good for if you want to have a file depository that goes along with it.
Yep.
And so we use it, like there's a monthly meeting that I run where I've tried to take the slides that I do, all go up in the archive. Everybody has access to them. I frequently do little book reviews that I send out via email, etc. Right now, we're doing a lot of stuff with both email and Teams. I need to make sure, Nat, that everybody's on Teams, because there were some issues with some people not being in the system and me not being able to add them. But I think it's probably resolved by now. And so I think for a lot of that stuff, email can just sort of go away. But I need to figure that out. So
yeah.
Oh, well, we should probably talk about battle lines and battle groups.
Yes. All right.
That is the topic that I put up for this evening. Okay, so this is actually a topic that I've been wanting to do for a long time. I mean, I've got a list of topics to do. I've actually got about 5 lists of topics to do. That's a problem, is that I need to sort of coordinate all my lists and sort of bin them and sort of, come up with a schedule. And I'm a lot more seat of the pants than I really should be at this part. This is episode 121. I should be a lot less seat of the pants, but I'm still kind of seat of the pants about this stuff. But this has been one that I've wanted to do for a while. And I was actually reading a very interesting paper that's almost 20 years old now, written by Bob Work, former Assistant Secretary of the Navy, former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense. He's somebody who shows up in this program a fair amount, as somebody that I have a lot of respect for. And I've read some stuff, and all of his stuff is just fantastic stuff. You may recall I first mentioned him when I went through Frank Chadwick's model of naval combat from the designer notes for the game Star Cruiser in the 2300 series. And I said that Bob Work did a presentation that really just sort of matched it perfectly. And the exact same themes are in Bob Work's this presentation that he had done, I think while he was out of government with one of the major think tanks. He's run a couple of think tanks, and I think he's running one now. So in any event, that's so I was reading this Bob Work article on the littoral combat ship, which you may recall when I was at Chris Carlson's a couple of sessions ago, we talked about the little crappy ship and all the problems with it. Well, Bob Work was a big supporter of it. Now, in the end, there were a couple of different problems with the littoral combat ship. One of them was the stuff that they actually built was problematic. One of them was that it was sort of a moving target. The Navy didn't quite know what they wanted to it. And then there was sort of a more fundamental conceptualization, like is this the right thing? Is this what combat's going to look like, etc. So yeah, the engineering was bad. Yeah, the process was bad. So let's ignore those two things. Bob Work was a fan of this ship, and he was arguing in favor of it because it fit in well with the conceptualization of combat, that future naval combat, that he thought this is the way the world's going, and so this is how we participate in that world. And so from that standpoint, I think the strongest argument in favor of LCS is in that first category. I mean, the other two were just sort of shit shows and more broken systems, but the first one is the sort of legitimate tactical and strategic and operational debate that military forces have to engage in all the time. And so that stuff, I decided to go do a little bit more research on the literal combat ship to sort of see, okay, was there a there? I needed to go and reacquaint myself with the arguments that were being made 20 years ago to see if there was a there. And I stumbled across this Bob Work article. And reading the Bob Work article got me liquored up for the topic for tonight, which is battle lines versus battle groups. And when I get into it, hopefully that'll become a little clearer. Okay, so some announcements. So the thing that you should notice there is it's looking like between now and the 16th of December, I've only got 2 definite no's right now, the 29th of October and the 4th of November. The next 2 weeks were listed as yes, but I've changed it to probably. So why have I changed it to probably? It's because there's the potential that I'm going to be doing something on the next 2 Saturdays. I'm being drug off to a couple of places over the course of the next 2 Saturdays. And it really comes down to, when do I think I can have a presentation or whatever I'm going to do in the can, so that I don't have to spend a big chunk of Saturday doing it, because I'm probably going to leave at like 7 o'clock in the morning and not get back until after dinner. And I'm not going to have the time or the cycles to actually put something together. So if it's not done by Friday, then I won't be able to do a show. My goal is to actually have it be more like Tuesday, Wednesday. I'm going to try to sort of figure out what I'm going to do for the next show tomorrow, and maybe even put something together. So hopefully we can do that. In fact, I may just do another show on the literal combat ship and invite Chris Carlson back if he's available. So in any event, still probably that I'll do a show the next couple of weeks, but it might not happen. And, I'll do the standard routine of putting something up on YouTube that makes it clear what exactly is going on. Okay, so for tonight's topic, battle lines versus battle group, first I'm going to talk about some history, give you an overview, sort of a broad brush historical overview, then looking at Age of Dreadnoughts and Age of Aircraft Carriers and Age of Missiles. And then I'm going to take a look at a couple of science fiction examples, specifically Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda and Renegade Legion Prefect. Now, I've picked both of those because those are backgrounds that have things that they call battleships, things that they call cruisers, etc., things that would fit in very well with the Age of Dreadnoughts, but but they're organized like they're aircraft carriers. And so they're a good sort of test case. All those slides are slides that I have done on this show previously. In fact, in some cases, probably more than once. But my expectation is that for some of the Andromeda stuff, I'm going to brush through some slides really fast without spending any time on them. And I'm also going to spend, the words are going to be different, right? The voiceover is going to be different because I'm talking about a different topic. Those slides have some interesting information, but it's more like, let me explain to you how these things work, how the system is set up, how this TV show works. This is going to be more like, here's how this all fits into the theme of tonight. So Rob Davidoff says another interesting point for this slide might be the Lost Fleet series. Yes, Lost Fleet is one I want to spend a show or two on. Problem is I need to reread it for a couple of reasons. One is I want to have John Henry, aka Jack Campbell, on the show. We've briefly talked about it about 2 years ago, about whether he'd be willing to come on the show. I'm pretty sure he would be, but I need to reread all the books that I've read. But I think I've probably at this point, because he's been cranking them out, I think I've only read about half the books in the series. And so I really wanted to sit down and read those. And before I have him on the show, but I expect to do at least one, maybe 2 or 3 episodes based upon the combat that takes place there, because there's all sorts of fascinating things in the Lost Fleet series. There's a discussion of logistics. There's realistic space combat. There's how doctrine fits into that. I've actually made the argument to him that the composite warfare commander system, that tactical doctrine would work well in his universe, because light speed lag and jamming are effectively the same kind of thing. They both decrease your ability to have meaningful communication with outlying parts of your fleet and sort of forcing them to sort of do their own thing. And the composite warfare commander system was designed for that. And when he and I had a probably 30-second conversation on this, and he went, "Roger that. That works." And as a U.S. Naval Academy grad who was a surface warfare officer, he knew exactly what I was talking about. So expect to spend some time with that. Let's see. I'm going back to, you know what? I'll do comments later on, I think. Okay, so here's the history overview. And as you can see, I'm going to explore the latter two in depth a little bit more. But this is gross generalizations, painting with a really broad brush. You notice I didn't actually put any dates on there because I don't want to get into an argument over dates. But in broad brush terms, during the Age of Sail, you had ships generally fought in a line of battle in the late Age of Sail. They early on, they started off as just a melee, right? You just go and you just fight whoever was nearby, and frequently it turned into boarding actions, etc. But eventually that stuff stopped, and they realized that the key to winning was concentrated firepower. That if you could concentrate your cannon fire better than the other guy, you could win. And you did that by forming a line of battle, which made it easier to control because you're playing follow the leader, and it allowed you to concentrate, to get your ships close enough together that you could concentrate gunfire. And it was characterized by the ships were very slow, but the weapons were really short ranged. So you knew you were going to have a battle, unless it was some crazy thing like you thought you were dealing with a merchant ship and it turned out to be armed or something like that. You know you're going to have a battle hours in advance, right? It takes hours for things to set up. And then when the firing started, the firing's at relatively short range, on the order of hundreds of yards, right? Very short range firing. You're doing all this through the use of signal flags. So your command and control is relatively simple. That relied on having a playbook that wasn't particularly deep. The signal flags got better over time because they realized they needed to be able to basically call plays, but your playbook wasn't very deep. You were limited in what you could do, and you were limited by where the wind was. And so all these things made it very difficult. Then steam comes into the picture. And over a period of time, you evolve from line of battleships, the Age of Sail, into something where you're coal-fired and you can basically move against the wind, and you're moving relatively fast. And your weapons are a much, much longer range, but they're not that much longer range. And I've just realized there's some typos on here. I've got line of battle in places where it shouldn't say line of battle. The Age of Steam, what really wasn't a line of battle type situation. It wasn't line of battle at all. It was penny pocket forces, not the sort of concentration that you later see. And early on, like in the pre-dreadnought era and before, you've got wildly disparate armament, but that's because you had a fire control problem. You couldn't really hit at any long range, and so you had having short range guns made sense. Having short range and long range guns made sense. So go back to all the talk I did, a couple of different talks I did on Karl Lautenschlager and how how warfare developed over time as it moved from this age of steam, the late part of which was the pre-dreadnought era, into the dreadnought era. So the line between Age of Sail and Age of Steam is kind of fuzzy. For a while there, you had steamships with sails on them. And that's because steam gave you great tactical mobility, but the ships weren't big enough to carry enough coal, and the engines were inefficient enough. You couldn't carry enough coal to go strategic distances with it. So you still need sails to cross the ocean. It's just when it came time to fight the battle, you'd fire up the boilers and you'd use early on paddle wheels, later screws, and you'd be under power, but you still used the wind to cross the oceans. So the line between those is really kind of fuzzy, and that's why a lot of navies looked at steam as being like, okay, maybe it's useful for things like harbor boats and stuff, but it's not useful for a warship because I got to deploy a warship, right? So steam, you might use steam as your local defense force, small boats that are going to carry relatively small guns or monitors or something like that, but I'd never use them to actually go to cross an ocean. Okay. Eventually, you end up with the Age of Dreadnoughts, where you do indeed have a line of battle, and you have the threat. I've been talking in the words up there about single axis, single domain threat versus now you've got a single axis, multi-domain threat, right? So mostly multi-domain or kind of multi-domain. By single axis, I mean, you kind of know where the bad guy is, right? The bad guy's not going to hit you from all different directions. You kind of know where they're coming from. That's a fuzzy idea. I mean, that doesn't mean that you can't, at an operational level, you may not know which direction he is, and you have to do scouting to figure that out. But I mean, once you get to the tactical level, it's like, yeah, he's over in that direction, so I can orient my forces directly against the threat. When you get to aircraft carriers, that isn't nearly the case because airplanes are really good about going around, and you can end up with a multi-axis threat very easily, in addition to submarines. So, but in any event, during the Age of Dreadnoughts, you've got signal flags, but now you've got lights. At some point in this, you get electrification. It's actually in the late Dreadnought era, pre-Dreadnought era. You get electrification, and then you've got radio. Now, early radios were short range and kind of crappy, but short range and crappy radio is better than no radio. So from that standpoint, that's actually an improvement. And for all of these things, it's as these things move through here, it's important not to just fully think of it as being like it went from being the right thing to being obsolete, because that's not really the way to look at this, right? Like as you get better radio and stuff like that, that doesn't mean that the old ways go away. We still use signal flags and lights on board modern naval vessels. I mean, there are times when you're in formation and that's just the easiest way to communicate with the guy behind you. And it's a way that, it's not going to give away your position, because if they can see your signal flags or they can see your lights, they can see you and they already know where you are. So from that standpoint, that's just something worth pointing out. So then you've got the age of aircraft carriers. Now you've got a multi-axis, multi-domain threat. It can come from above, it can come from below, it can be a surface forces, subsurface forces, etc. Your weapons range has gotten a lot longer. Now, in the age of dreadnoughts, in both cases, I say long-range weapons, but it should be really kind of long range versus very, very long range, right? Because you go from a few miles to 10 miles to 100 miles, 200 miles, right? You've got an order of magnitude improvement in the range by the time you've got to aircraft carriers. Now, there's a graph. I need to go find it, or I need to recreate it. The last time I went looking for it, I couldn't find it, and I didn't have time to look tonight. It shows the firepower that a naval battle group, that various naval units could, the firepower at a given distance of the Navy in a battle in the World War II. And there's this long tail that's pretty flat that goes out to 300 miles or so. But right between 0 miles
I believe we lost him. So, hi guys! I'm entertaining you for the time being! How have you been? I hope you have been well. Yeah, we did lose him. So, where's the child? One sec. We are grabbing a child. Look. Oh, there he is.
Okay.
We were grabbing the child.
You were grabbing the child. So that's good. That's good. So I'm glad that we
Wonder
have
says hello.
So that was a careless. Okay.
What happened?
Okay. That was a careless brush of the hand on the trackpad on my laptop, which managed to not only knock me out of the studio, but flip me over from this StreamYard setup to my StreamYard setup, because this is all done. So this is done through Stogies, and so it flipped me to my own personal StreamYard setup. So when I went back in, I immediately, enter studio, and it's like, wait a minute, no, nothing's here. Where did it all go?
That'll do it.
I had to back out and switch and stuff like that. So sorry about that.
Oh, good, it happens. I heard you pop, and I was like, I waited a second. I was like, yeah, we'll.
Yeah, it's totally not network. It's totally not network. I went to do something on my keyboard, and I
yes, sort of user error. Trackpad. That is why there is a wild LYSSA present for these most of the time.
And an emergency distraction cat.
Yes, exactly. Look, distraction.
So, all right, I will get back to it. Let me fast forward a couple of slides. Let's see. No, actually, I think I was still there. Yeah, I was talking about the curve. And so this curve shows you go out to about 300 miles, and it sort of has a long flat piece. But between about 0 and like 18 miles, 15 miles, something like that, there's this big spike, right? The amount of ordnance that the U.S. Navy could put on target was huge. And then it just drops like a rock. And then it's pretty flat out to about 300 miles, and then it tapers off altogether. Well, that big spike is the range of a battleship gun, because up close, nothing can put more ordnance on target than a battleship firing 8 or 9 guns, depending upon which flavor of U.S. battleship we're talking about. So they can just pound the hell out of stuff. So there is a trade-off there, right? When you go from the age of dreadnoughts to the age of aircraft carriers, the amount of ordnance that you could deliver, like in World War II, the amount of ordnance they could deliver went down in most cases, but they could put it in more precisely. They probably got more hits, and they could do it to a lot longer range. The trade-off was worth it. But, those battleship forces didn't go away. The battleships were also very useful in World War II. The comment's been made, I think it was made by Wayne Hughes, if I remember correctly, that with the exception of minesweepers, there was no ship in World War II no warship in World War II was used for the mission it was originally designed for. Everybody was sort of throwing them into different missions. Cruisers are the eyes of the fleet. Nope. Airplanes are the eyes of the fleet. Things like that. Battleships fighting other battleships. Nah, as a general rule, battleships did shore bombardment, and they did anti-aircraft duty. So, all right. So let's explore these last two more in depth. So in the age of dreadnoughts, I've already talked about signal flags, lights, et cetera, et cetera. But the important thing to understand about this is that when I say form a single battle line, I don't mean in a battle. I mean on planet Earth, right? We're going to fight a war. We concentrate the fleet into the battle fleet and the scouting fleet. Scouting fleet's sort of a strategic scouting fleet, right? It's not tactical scouting that's done by cruisers from within the battle fleet. It is go out and sort of check all the places where the fleet might be. And hopefully, if you find, hopefully they end up close enough that they can run back. If, it's like, okay, we've checked here, we've checked here, we've checked here. We're going to fall back on the fleet because we're pretty sure they're over there. Hopefully we get back in time for the battle. But the plan was really that you would have a single battle line. Now, you had some forces in one ocean, some forces in the other ocean. In theory, you could do two separate battle lines, but we didn't really plan for that. We planned that we're going to be fighting one power or another, could be Japan, could be Germany, could be the Royal Navy, could be all sorts of different places. And we will move whichever ships are on the wrong coast to the correct coast so they can form up with the battleships that are there and we can have an integrated fleet. That's pretty much what the plan was. And go Panama Canal. The Panama Canal makes this really feasible for us to be able to move between the two different sides, because otherwise you got to go around the Cape. That sucks. But that's really, so it sort of kind of limited our ability to concentrate on just one location. And it was all about making sure that you got the location right. Now, I'll note, this is a very Mahanian view of the world. And we know from looking at the Kincaid document a while back that not everybody thought that it worked this way. They were willing to listen to Corbett. Corbett really sort of viewed, okay, so you got to have the battle line prepared to go do the thing. But, the workaday work of the Navy, in this case, the Royal Navy, is really sort of the small ships out on patrol, maintaining the mine barrage, dealing with small force sort of stuff, exercising sea control, protecting shipping and attacking the other guy's shipping. And that's mostly lighter forces than that, with the occasional heavy force that gets sent, either to interdict the other guy doing that or to protect your guys, right? It's like, they're sending some cruisers out. We should send some battle cruisers out to let the bad guys know that it's a bad idea for them to try to harass our small boys. Let's go do that. And so, that's a very Corbettian view of how the world works. The Mahanian view is sort of like concentrate and look for the opportunity for the battle. But when it comes to, so I'm not really talking about the everyday sort of sea control aspects of protection of trade and things like that. I'm talking about when the big boys get together to fight. I'm explicitly talking about that part. And everybody agreed that you'd probably form a single battle line to do that, because you don't want the other guy's battle line. You don't want to get caught in detail and defeated in detail. And so that's how we organized it. So there were C2 issues. Now, Age of Dreadnoughts, right? Starting in 1905-ish, right? Depending upon which ship you're talking about, do you count Michigan or not, that sort of stuff. Let's call it 1905 as sort of when all the plans started getting rolling. If you talk about 1905 to 1945 as being approximately that era, okay, that works. Maybe a few years after, but let's call it that 40 years. The beginning of that 40-year time period and the end of that 40-year time period look a lot different in terms of your ability to coordinate. We had spent a lot of effort improving radio, improving our ability to pass data back and forth. Our tactics, techniques, and procedures got a lot better. And so by the end of that time period, our C2 limitations were different, because we'd spent a lot of time solving command and control problems. But even so, you still have this issue where you're allocating fire between your battle line and the enemy, the ships in the enemy battle line. And so you had limited tactical flexibility because you're doing that coordination, you're having to maintain the line in order to concentrate fire. You've got limited strategic flexibility because you got one battle line. And if you're going to aggregate all your forces like that, you're kind of stuck. And there was a natural tendency to think of all of this because the battle line was the most important part, right? Remember what the Harris Lanning article that I talked about a couple of times about how, there's different weapon systems, there's different ships have different roles and they have different primary weapons, but it's all in support of the battle line. And so just you think about your destroyers in terms of how the destroyers affect the battle line, right? It's an integrated force with a lot of different escorts and stuff, all fighting together, but it's really sort of focused on the battleships of the battle line. And it's concentrated because it has to be, that's how it works. So let's talk about aircraft carriers. Delete that line of battle thing. That doesn't make sense for aircraft carriers. Aircraft carriers don't fight in lines of aircraft carriers, right? They don't do that. They fight in battle groups. And a battle group looks a lot different than a battle line. A battle line is literally the line of battleships, and then you've got cruisers and destroyers and various squadrons, and the squadrons sort of do squadron level stuff, right? They operate as a squadron. A squadron of destroyers will do an attack, et cetera, et cetera. When you get to battle groups, it doesn't quite work like that. The destroyers did still kind of have a tendency to get sent off to do stuff, but as a general rule, you've got the aircraft carrier that is being protected by a ring of ships so that it can launch and recover aircraft as need be. But it's really focused on an individual battle or individual aircraft carrier. And if there happens to be more than one aircraft carrier present, they may or may not be their own little bubbles of excellence, or they may try to form together. But the thing is, there's lots of maneuver that's taking place in all this. So it's actually easier if they're not together. It's easier to have them separated. Now, you've got less defensive fire if you do it that way. So maybe you want to put them together. But you're really sort of organized fundamentally differently with a wide variety of ships in a packet, rather than sort of segregated by ship type. That also applies to other surface forces. So in the late age of aircraft carriers, which I would say, goes up to, say, the end of the Cold War, you might have surface action groups that basically function that same way, even though they were around a battleship. We brought the Iowas back. Did we ever talk about operating the Iowa class battleships together and form a line of battle with them? No, because that's not how that worked. Even though one of the arguments for bringing them back was to send them hunting after the Kirovs, the Russian battle cruisers, which they called them battle cruisers. They were just big cruisers with lots and lots of missiles. But one of the thoughts was, we'll send the Iowa class to go hunt those guys down, right? And so even though we're talking about sort of fighting a classic, something that looks kind of like a classic surface action, we weren't talking about a line of battles to do that. If it's not apparent, one of the things this gets you is modular force construction. So what do I mean by that? I mean, the unit of analysis for the battle line is the battle line, right? You throw everything into the battle line, and maybe in some cases you have real overmatch, and maybe in other cases it's fairly even, but it's really kind of, you're just kind of sending the battle line to do stuff in theory. With this is implicit in this idea is the idea that I'm going to break up forces and separate them and concentrate them as need be. And that includes, like, okay, this is a big operation. I think I'm going to need 4 aircraft carriers for it. So I'll send 2 groups of 2 to go do it. Late in the war, especially, we had task forces. Basically, we were organized around about 15 heavy carriers, of which they were organized in 7 groups of 2 and 1 group of 1, for a total of 8 battle groups, or the carrier battle groups that we could send to wherever we needed to. But if you needed 4 of them in one place, you'd aggregate them as a group of 4. Or if you needed 6, you'd aggregate them as a group of 6. Gave you a lot more flexibility in your ability to sort of tailor forces. So the forces were modular, you could build them. If you needed to bring them together to concentrate, you could do that. Most of the time, you could keep them dispersed and keep them safer that way. Now, realistically, that looks good on paper. Did we do that? Well, yes and no. If you have to get on the radio in order to call the guys in, now you're increasing the amount of radio traffic you have. And so there was always a tendency to not do that. You know, if you're close, you can communicate via lights and flags. There was always a tendency to want to communicate via lights and flags when you could, if you thought the enemy was anywhere nearby, because you wanted him not to be able to do direction finding on you. It's better if he doesn't know you're around, right? In a perfect world, the first that the enemy knows that you're in the neighborhood is when he sees your dive bombers coming in on his deck. So, all right, let's talk briefly about missiles. Late in this 1980s, we have the vertical launch system coming in. And so the vertical launch system was sort of the game changer for the Navy. It takes stuff that missiles that were in a rotary missile launcher that frequently had to sort of kind of be designed for the missile and turns it into something that can hold a wide variety of missiles and more efficiently than the mechanism it replaced. And a vertical launch system cell is so simple compared to those rotary magazines that you used. And in terms of your ability to like pick which missile you're going to fire, like I need one of the specials, you know, SM2 comes in multiple different blocks with different capabilities. I need this particular capability. I'll just fire the missile that's in that cell. I don't have to move the other missiles around. I don't have to load it into a launcher. I just fire that missile. Oh, that one, that's a low, slow flyer. I'm going to fire something else at it. You know, like that's just some silly bomber. I can fire something that's relatively low capability at it because it can't run anyway. And so I don't have to like swap missiles around or anything else like that. And I can fire them faster. Boom, 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 boom. I can carry more of them. And, you know, I have the one system that's relatively simple and I only have to do maintenance on it. I don't have to integrate all the different fire control systems because I don't have to have like 5 different fire control systems in order to make it work. So much simpler, so much more capability. During the same time period, this also has the effect of spreading the offense. So for a long time there, it's like, okay, the destroyers are defensive, protecting the aircraft carrier, which had the main striking capability. The cruisers are defensive, protecting the aircraft carrier, cruisers against air threats, destroyers against subsurface threats. Then you started adding more and more air capability on the destroyers. And then eventually, you know, okay, with VLS, I've got extra launch cells and I'll just put long-range missiles in them. So now I've got striking power, offensive striking power in all of my surface forces. And I add VLS onto submarines, and now I've got surface striking power and, you know, land attack capability in all of my ships. So all of my ships get to go offensive in a way that wasn't happening before the advent of the age of missiles, and specifically adding VLS made that so much easier for everybody, right? You can load a Tomahawk into a VLS cell. Modern surface combatants with the old launching systems couldn't handle Tomahawk. It's just too big and heavy a weapon. They weren't designed for it. But now you can put Tomahawk in VLS cells. And so if you wanted to send a Burke to sea with nothing but Tomahawks in it, you'd never do that. But if you wanted to, you could. And so now you've just spread the threat out. And so they're intended to sort of fight first in battle groups. They then created the strike group, which is smaller than a battle group, with the idea that you're going to integrate them together. You could theoretically send one ship out to do strikes. We do that on the submarine side. You might send one submarine out to do strikes, and it launches off a load of missiles, and then it runs away. And it's out there by itself. You've still got this modular force construction idea, except it's even more modular. And everybody's an offensive striker, and so now everybody's a threat. They can't ignore it. It forces the bad guys to sort of spread things out. So that's sort of the overview of battle line versus battle group. Now let's talk about some science fiction in particular. And let's start with Andromeda. Now this is a slide that you've seen before in a slightly different format. The part I'm going to emphasize here is they had a retired surface warfare officer on the staff, and it shows from both what you see in the screen and a lot of the background material that you see. A lot of this comes from the Save Andromeda .com website, the All Systems University. All Systems University was an in-universe website that they put up. This is the mirror of it, and it's got all the information here about all the different technical systems, etc. It's really, really fantastic. Oh, and it's also worth pointing out, they spend a lot of time talking about sensors, and that's the way it really works, right? The Aegis weapon system is built around a radar. The funky part of that, the part where all the magic is the radar, right? We named the ship after the radar. That should tell you the importance of sensors. Okay, there's a lot of stuff here. The bottom part is all the different missions that they do, and I'm not going to get into that. I point you back to the previous episode where I spent some time talking about all the different mission areas. The important part is up above, where it says the Systems Commonwealth High Guard is divided into 10 fleets, each charged with forward presence responsibilities and various galactic entities that comprise the local group. They're further subdivided into planetfall readiness groups and heavy cruiser battle groups. So they're forces that are centered around either a heavy cruiser primarily aimed at space operations or a planetfall readiness group primarily aimed at putting troops on the ground. Now, this is the way that the U.S. Navy is organized. We've got amphibious ready groups that may or may not have explicitly assigned escorts. And then we've got carrier strike groups that are surrounding the carrier and its escorts. So it's the carrier and its escorts. For a while there, we had expeditionary strike groups, which is basically the ARG plus dedicated escorts. ESGs kind of went away. I don't know where they currently stand in the doctrine, but as a practical matter, they looked great on paper. The idea was that we're going to add some destroyers and cruisers to the ARG. And as a result, now you've got something that's got some offensive punch because it's got VLS cells and it can fire Tomahawks and it can do all these things. And in practice, we never deployed them that way. The ARG had a tendency to go do its own thing with minimal escort. I'm not an amphib guy. I didn't really spend a whole lot of time in that world, so I've never spent any time at sea on an amphib. I've been on an amphib once, and it was in port. And so I'm not the guy to talk about how they do their thing. But it kind of looks kind of weird from where I'm sitting, that you'd send ships out with the type of escort that they do. But it's not my Jeopardy category. Okay, so they've got lots of different types of ships. That's the important thing to take away from this slide. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time dwelling on it. They've got heavy cruisers that are sort of the big, high endurance. They can do a whole bunch of different things, lots of sort of generic capability, really big and multi-role. And then you've got a bunch of other ships that are not really multi-role. They're really kind of specialized. And they can do a whole bunch of different things. And in some cases, they're better than the heavy cruiser. Like the Deep Standoff Attack ship is the premier space-to-space asset. But it's not as good all around as a heavy cruiser is. Likewise, the Group Defense Frigate, it's defensively oriented. It's not offensively oriented. Okay. This slide is all the combat support ships. They're specialized ships that are there for supply and maintenance and things like that, and sort of patrol stuff. At some point, I need to go back and rewatch the first 3 seasons of this show where they really, to the degree they go into anything. I mean, Andromeda is frustrating in a couple of ways. One is that it sort of jumped the shark when Kevin Sorbo took over. The other way it's frustrating is there's a lot of really good background stuff, but you don't actually see any of this, right? Because the systems Commonwealth has been destroyed, and this is the doctrine that dates to a time in the past, but they don't have the Navy that goes along with this doctrine anymore. So there's a lot of stuff we don't know about it. We have these write-ups, but we don't know all the details. Okay, so we're going to come back to what's Wright saying, because Wright is an amphib guy, although he's an old amphib guy. It's been a while since he's been on an amphib. I've been at Seymour recently than he has. I'm pretty sure. But let's see. Time to go to the next slide. Okay. So this is specifically what the heavy cruiser can do. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on the slide. I'm just going to point out those three-letter categories down at the bottom are those mission types that were a couple of slides ago, and that's the numeric value on a scale of 0. I think the biggest we see on any of them is a 10. But if you wanted to design the high guard game, they gave you the counter values. Oh, it's also worth looking over here. Look over here at all the different things that this thing has. It's got lots of attack drones. It carries fighters. This is not a battleship. It doesn't map to a U.S. World War II heavy cruiser. It doesn't map to any heavy cruiser today. It doesn't map to a battleship, and it doesn't map to an aircraft carrier either. It really is a hybrid in that it's got significant firepower outside of its carried craft, but it also has a bunch of drone fighters that it can use to go off and do stuff. So it's not just an aircraft carrier in space. It's not just a battleship in space. It's got a lot of mixed capabilities. Okay. Probably should have put this a little bit earlier, because this talks about the heavy cruiser battle groups and the planetfall readiness group, and it sort of gives a little breakdown there. I'm going to go ahead and skip to the next slide, which has a better breakdown. So here's a heavy carrier battle group and how much it carries of each class. Now, the thing that I noticed is when you look at this thing, oh my God, these groups are huge, right? So you've got one heavy cruiser, 4 deep space attack vessels, 16 of the group defense frigates, 9 of the long range scouts, and 4, I forget what SAM is, but it's got 4 of them. And so let's see, let's total that up, 20, 30, 31, 34 ships. It's got 34 ships in its group, of which one is this heavy cruiser that the entire thing is sort of formed around. That sounds closer to a U.S. carrier battle group than it does a dreadnought or a battle line. But boy, that's a big force. And we don't have any idea about how it deploys. My guess is this thing deploys over basically an entire solar system. But I think carrier battle groups at their largest were about 12. So between twice and 3 times this, closer to 1/3 the size of this than anything else. So it's about 1/3 the size in the real world. So I guess I do have the standard distribution of assets in the heavy carrier heavy cruiser battle group is approximately 3 to 4 light seconds, with heavy cruisers and SAMs at the core, surrounded by concentric spheres of deep space attack group defense frigates and long range scouts. That I'd like to pull the thread on that. I'd like to meet the guy who wrote that up, because that doesn't quite make sense to me. I would think that you'd sort of move them off in various axes. Same thing for the planetfall readiness group. I'll leave it on the screen for a few seconds, and then I'm going to move on. All right, I'm going to move on. Oh, and there's the mission areas. I think I had the missionaries up front. There was the source I pulled these from an older presentation, and I had a couple of different versions of them, and I think I failed on version control. Okay, so let's take a look at Renegade Legion. And so this kind of looks a lot like High Guard, except it's got a lot fewer forces. It doesn't have 34. It's only got 10. But they talk about battleship squadrons being built around a battleship and a heavy cruiser and a handful of destroyers, and then a couple of frigates and a couple of patrol craft. And so there's no real description in any of the canon sources on how you'd fight these things. And to be honest, I've never played Prefect, the game that these came out of, so I don't have a good feel for how everybody else thinks they're fought too. But it's clear this is a force that's very heavy on missiles. It doesn't, for command and control reasons, just like with the High Guard, for command and control reasons, it doesn't need to form a line of battle. It can send forces out. It's got a lot of offensive capability and maybe not as much defensive capability as the High Guard heavy cruiser squadron does, or heavy cruiser battle group does. But it's designed to be a modular force that they can use to reinforce systems. If you remember back to the Prefect episode where I talked about Renegade Legion, these things are a garrison force, right? You don't forward deploy these. These are in the theater reserve because due to the way that sensors work in that universe and the way the FTL drive works in that universe, you've got enough time for quick reaction forces to come from the theater reserve to wherever the attack is going on. And so this is a really good way of being able to say, okay, we detect that they're bringing in 3 battleship squadrons, so we are going to send 5, and with the associated ships. And since they're all sort of linked together, they work together. They're not like in the U.S. World War II stuff where the destroyers are off doing the destroyer thing separately. They're all clustered around that like a carrier battle group is. They just deploy them all at the same time, and it gives you a modular capability to deploy stuff. And so on the right-hand side, you can see the different types of ships they have. You'll notice that for every different, this is a universe where they use the different types of ships are primarily about size. So a battleship carries more and bigger weapons than a cruiser, more and bigger weapons than a destroyer, more and bigger weapons than a frigate. But at every level of size, they also have a carrier class, a battleship class carrier, a cruiser class carrier, etc., which replaces the spinal mount with extra fighters, extra attack craft. Now, even a regular battleship has like a squadron, but this would, instead of having 1 squadron, it would have 3 squadrons of fighters, that sort of deal. So it trades off one weapon system for another. And let's see. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I need to say on that. And there really isn't. So I'm going to go through, that's my last slide. So I'm going to scroll through and see if there's anything I want to talk about. Okay, so Wright gives a list of what they had in the 1980s. Amphib Readiness Group had 1 LPH, 1 LPD, landing ship dock, 2 landing ship. Okay, yep, that tracks. Wright says that he wishes they had more DDGs as escorts during his time. Okay. And so, one thing I didn't mention when talking about the Dreadnought era and when I was talking about World War II in particular, and the carrier, actually, it's more about the carrier area. You had battleships assigned to the aircraft carrier groups to do air defense, and they kept the fast battleships with the carriers because they could keep up with the carriers, whereas the older, slower battleships generally relegated to protecting transports and doing fire support ashore because they couldn't keep up with the carriers so much. So there was still provisions to split the battleships off from the carriers and form a battle line and go fight a surface action if need be. But by that point, we weren't by the time they were really thinking in those terms, most of the Japanese battleships had been sunk by that point. And so there were still a few of them out, and you might want to, plug the Strait with them if you need to. And that was actually one of the things that happened with Taffy 3 and that battle is that the word had gotten, the Southern Force had overheard Halsey's staff telling them, be prepared to split off into a separate battleship division to go do battleship division stuff. They never actually did it, but they got the be prepared to order, and that's what led them to think that the battleships were in a different location. Okay. Okay, I'm not seeing a whole lot of other stuff. Okay. So a little bit of a discussion about John Henry's, aka Jack Campbell's Lost Fleet series. Okay, so I'm going to skip back down to the beginning. Or skip back down to the end. So Olive says that he's a bit lost at this point. I'm sorry I lost you on that. If you've got a more specific question, I will try to get you unlost. So One Horse Shay says, what would be the main punch of the squadron, the BB and the CA, while the others protect them? It's in Renegade Legion, it doesn't quite work like that because everything just basically has approximate. It's not fair to say that it's the same kind of weapon because the guns do get smaller, but they're mounted in bays. You've got missiles in bays and other weapons in bays, and so they just sort of fire more of them. That was not as satisfying an answer for FOSSA as I know a lot of people that when that came out and they saw that they were just aggregating smaller guns into larger weapons emplacements, that there was a lot of us that weren't real happy about that seemed to be sort of chickening out. So the big bad weapon in this is the spinal mount that fires what they call the projectile a crowbar, and it's basically just a kinetic penetrator, and they can vary in size with bigger ships throwing bigger crowbars. And so the end result of that is that's the thing that would really put a hurt on, but you've got lots of lasers and other weapons as well. Okay. Olive said, I think for both Andromeda and Renegade Legion, never did get a sense of who these navies were designed to fight and who was trying to do what. Yeah, it's like, that in Andromeda, there was the big war against the Magog that occurred right before the pilot episode, right? That was sort of the thing that set in motion the fall of the Systems Commonwealth, was this big war against the Magog. But who'd they have this big navy for previously? We know they did some exploration stuff, and we know they were designed to protect the local group, right? This is a huge organization, 360,000 ships, something like that. But who exactly was the threat? And so you see the same thing, and there's a book series that we're gonna do a read along at some point, the Exordium series, where you sort of see the same thing in the Exordium series. It's like, where's the threat? Occasionally, there's one war that fits in its backstory, and it was fought with a relatively small number of battle cruisers in that universe, and you sort of came away with the expectation, the belief that the right way to think of this is is Britain's colonial empire. In that, there was lots of little wars going on all the time. Everybody was under-resourced. And so you sort of fought with the forces that you had nearby, right? If the entire British army decided to come and wail on you, that would be bad for whoever was being wailed on. But that's not the way they did it. They didn't have the forces to spread around. So I started to get the impression that's the same as how it worked in Andromeda, is that they're really designed to deal with small threats. And so having a modular force that you can send small groups of ships to deal with, my guess is for virtually anything in that universe, that is a game changer, right? This force shows up and instantaneously becomes the most powerful thing in the system from whatever threat they're dealing with. If not, send two. Well, then they end up fighting the Magog and like the Magog world ship and that stuff. And it's like, they don't know how to deal with something like that because they're not used to something that's that big. And it's unclear to me that they necessarily know how to coordinate. This, incidentally, is a theme that I think exists in Star Trek also. I need to go back and rewatch all the Dominion War stuff, but you go through the original series, and the greatest number of ships you ever see together is about four or five, something like that. And so, as a general rule, if you don't practice stuff, and then you've got all these exploration cruisers that are out alone and unafraid, if they're out doing their own thing, they don't get a chance to practice group tactics. They don't get a chance to sort of practice that sort of stuff. So how good are they at it? I wonder about how good the High Guard really was at that stuff. Perfectly fine force at an individual level, but how good were they at aggregating? Did their doctrine support aggregating? So Dr. Alexander Clark, actually, who's a British naval historian, actually has an episode where he talks about the High Guard, and he basically says, oh, they were sort of hidebound, and they sort of screwed up because they didn't know what they were doing, and they just kept trying to do, as near as we can tell, they just kept trying to do the same thing. I'm a lot more sympathetic to that because, usually in the middle of the war is like in the middle of the battle is the wrong time to throw out your doctrine, right? If you're generally better off trying to leverage the stuff that you do well than to just try to invent stuff on the fly, generally. Now, his argument is that wasn't working, so why didn't they do more inventing on the fly? And to which my response is, for all we know, they did, because they didn't really show the details of that, right? We get a lot better idea of what happened in the Dominion War because we see a lot more of it. And senior people happen to be primary characters in the TV show, so we get to understand their thinking a lot better than we ever did in Andromeda with regard to this war that really was just sort of a backdrop, kickoff for the rest of the series. So One Horse Shay says another reason for the Alaska class escort against fighters to protect the carriers. They were really using the battleships for that. I don't think that's certainly not the reason why they originally justified the Alaskas. They originally justified the Alaskas as they thought they were going to have to deal with larger cruiser, and they wanted to send a cruiser after it to track down the Megamis rather than have something else do it. Now, in the end, it turns out they didn't really need it. The ship that it was designed to protect against, first of all, didn't really exist when they built it. And then later when the Japanese decided that it should exist, they never got around to building it. Okay. Okay. I'm scrolling down to the end. One Horse Shay says, yeah, it wasn't the justification for the Alaska, but it was another excuse to have an admiral to try to get it. Yeah, that fair enough, right? If an asset is available, you want to deploy it, you've got it, you should use it. If you're not going to use it, then you're just going to, then the right answer is strip it for parts. And since they just built it, they decided not to do that. But I think, the two Alaskas that were built were in service for less than 2 years. They were harder to get in the water and get built than they thought they were going to be, and then in the end, they weren't around very long. Personally, I think there's a few things they should have done. I mean, they really wanted to stick with 9 guns, and as a result, they went with smaller guns. So they had to design a gun and design the ammo and all the other stuff that went along with that. I understand why they wanted 9 guns. It had to deal with what their predicted hit rate was. So they wanted a larger salvo. I still think they probably would have been better rather than do like 3 triples. Just take 16-inch 50s and mount them 2 per turret and put 6 guns instead of 9 on it. I think they probably would have been better if they could have either used the same ammunition as the Iowas or the South Dakotas and the North Carolinas. They could have used that same ammunition. Then it just simplifies a whole bunch of different things. And they know how to build that gun. Building that gun wouldn't have been a problem. So the problem was they just couldn't fit 3 per turret. So put in 2. All right. I think that pretty much is a wrap for today. I can't think of anything else right now. Oops, hold on a second. Turn that off. I can't think of anything else to go into right now. Like I've been saying a lot recently, I reserve the right to come back to this topic after I've done some more thinking on it. This is really I wouldn't call it a total rough draft because I've been doing some thinking on this for a while, but it's certainly not the final word on that. And I would, as always, like to thank everybody for not thinking that I'm speaking for my employer, because I am not. And I'd also like to thank everybody for spending their Saturday evening watching a show on YouTube rather than going out and doing something fun in the outside world. And I'd especially like to thank LYSSA for spending her Saturday evening here. And occasionally,
wait, get back here. God damn
I was just going to say, and occasionally showing the really cute cat, but it sounds like looks like the really cute cat made her escape.
Yeah, she literally just jumped out. Well, come here. Do you want pets? Do you want to say goodbye? No.
Well, okay. So we got a cat fix earlier, so that's a good thing. So with that in mind, I think it's probably time to go ahead and call it. Thank you very much, everybody. And we will see you maybe next week. Probably next week. I'll let you know.
Bye now. Sounds good. Bye, guys. Bye.